Welcome to Faith Fondue, a podcast featuring author and educator Haley DeMaria and teacher and blogger Ann Strickers. Faith Fondue features a melting pot of topics ignited by a flame, our faith, and guided by the Holy Spirit. This is Season 4, Episode 16. It is August 25th, and I have a B-list holiday for you, Ann. This weekend was the start of college football. College football started this weekend, which was certainly an exciting time in our home and across the country for many college football fans. And it was a great game, which doesn't always happen with some of these early season matchups. So first, let's catch up. We have the Flame. Ann, what is hot this week in your world?
Okay, so just to roll back for a second, are we going to talk about this B-list holiday? Because is the beginning of college football a quote unquote B-list holiday? My curiosity is.
I'm not even. It's like a D-list holiday. I'm not even sure it's a holiday. We always joke about A-list holidays versus B-list, which are minor ones. Yeah. This is low on the totem pole, but it was something that was certainly celebrated across the country. Yes. So if that's your definition of a holiday, then yes.
Okay. Yeah. No, because second most popular sport in America, I was just listening to a podcast about that, is college football. Now, I don't know if they were inflating it, but that was the claim.
What was the first?
NFL.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. And so a friend did ask, like, why is this game in Ireland? And I, drew from our experience. I know you went last year, but there's so much excitement when these games go to a place like Ireland. The NFL will be in Germany this year, as well as London. They've been to Mexico City. What fans find is they encounter another culture. I know the Irish people loved hosting Notre Dame. Even before Notre Dame was there, Northwestern had played there. So to me, in my experience, I understood why this game was taking place there. And it is about the mighty dollar and the fan experience. They pushed back on that idea, but I saw it as a positive and an exciting way. Baseball does this. The MLB, the regular season started in Korea this last year. We're a global, society now. So I don't know that I find it critical, but I could understand why people ask questions.
Right. Well, I think it's like any holiday that becomes commercialized. People question it, criticize it, and certainly college football has gone that path as well. But I had the good fortune of being at both of the last two Notre Dame games that were played in Ireland. And it is a holiday in many ways if you look at the definition. It brings people together. It's a family atmosphere. We are celebrating core values. For Notre Dame, there's a faith aspect to it. There's always Mass when we travel on the road and when we're at home. But it was exciting. It's fun to have college football back. It will be part of my takeaway this week that I'll share later. But it was an exciting game to watch.
Well, awesome. Well, it's something that we will be discussing at the lunch table, and that's my topic for the Flame this week. So just going back to school, I heard, again, another podcast. So it should not be surprising that people who have a podcast listen to other podcasts, and, writers like to read other writers, et cetera. But this podcast was focusing on a human behavioral scientist at Yale who studied when people enter into a community or start something new, there's about 3-week window by which you establish your norms. So 3 weeks. And then once that 3-week window has passed, that's what is kind of the rule of thumb. So I think that is important as a classroom teacher, as a coach, if you're starting a new season and whatnot. So tuck that thought away, because that is like the timeliness of something that happened for us at back to school. So one of our big mottos, I got this from a Jesuit, is Jesuit education happens at tables. I personally think it could be Catholic education. We just, made it personal to our community. But the idea is that education happens at the desk, at the learning table. It happens at the Eucharistic table when we gather together for Mass, but it also happens in the lunchroom or when you share a meal together. So we learn a lot about other students, about each other, about our disciplines, about, whatever at the lunch table. It was a huge part of our culture. I love going to lunch. I look forward to it. And we could talk about that for quite a bit. However, this year our school is under construction. We do not have a lunchroom. Our dining room is gone. That is like a sacred space. It is gone. So there's this question of, well, we believe this, that education happens at the lunch table. Where are we going to have lunch? And we didn't really offer an answer to that. We have a faculty lounge, but it was in total disarray. Couches, I mean, crappy tables, chairs mismatched, like a notepad of detention slips, like was actually balancing one of the tables. Like it was like kitty wampus, so to speak. I mean, that's how bad it was. And I'm not joking, Haley, like this kept me up at night as someone who works in adult spirituality. I'm like, this is too valuable to just like, I don't want this 3-week window to pass and now people are eating in their office or eating in their classroom. I want us to find a place to come together. So worked with, another colleague, and we went in the workroom and we started talking about how we could create tables and spaces. And then this one faculty member who's kind of overseeing the management of the whole like remodel said, you should really ask other teachers what they think, what will work. Sure enough, a couple of the male teachers chimed in about the couches, where they should go. Totally revamped. It looks great. People are sitting in there. We won't get everyone. It's too crowded for some people, but overall, we have made it happen and success.
Excellent. Excellent. I love that story. I love that you saw a problem that you wanted to fix. You did something about it. You didn't just complain like many people might. And
Yeah.
and hopefully that will play out. Now will the lunchroom come back when are you reconstructing a new one? Is it just under construction or is it going away permanently?
It's 2 years
Oof.
that we are in this phase. So that's where I was like added pressure. I don't entirely know. There is a space for faculty to eat. I don't totally understand what it's going to look like, but it is something that I think is important. So maybe that's the next step. Maybe for my takeaway is, now that we have this space, to look ahead and talk to the powers that be about that space. But I guess I would offer for anybody, who's starting the school year, think about your norms in the 3 weeks,
Mhm.
think about the spaces where people gather, but also just like, the importance of having a meal and a lunch table. I really do believe that. I think we learn so much when we sit down with each other. So much of society is pulling us away from eating and taking a break. But family, like as a family, I'm sure you have family meals.
Right.
That's like a important
It is. Well,
piece.
and it's also it's in a school for the students also. It is unstructured time. So it's time where they can have conversations that aren't guided by what's going on in the classroom, where they're allowed to talk, where they can disagree, where they can
True.
have,
Yeah.
that social
Yeah. Good point.
education takes place at the
Yeah.
lunch table as well. It's interesting. I would love to read more. I would love if you could share offline and we can post it as well, the information, the name of the behavioral scientist out of Yale. We use a social curriculum at St. Anne's called Responsive Classroom, and that is geared towards younger children.
Okay.
And a big component of a responsive classroom is called the first 6 weeks of school. So we live by the first 6 weeks of school, which is exactly that. It is
Wow.
establishing
Yeah.
classroom routines, norms. They talk about slowing down those first 6 weeks, not jumping into everything right away, because then you can move faster later on. And we know students do well, especially little ones, but really any age, when they can predict, when they have predictability, when they understand how the classroom works, how it functions, what their role is in the classroom. And, again, the research at the young age shows that academic learning will really flourish when students have that very well structured, scaffolded classroom. So I don't know if it's 3 weeks for teenagers and
Yeah.
adults. So
Right.
we
Right.
talk about the first week, 6 weeks, but being as
Yeah.
familiar with responsive classroom as I am, I would love to read
Yeah.
the
Compare and contrast.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. Where the research is showing 3 weeks. That's might be a little hard for a 2 or 3 year old, but it would be
For
interesting
sure.
because my guess
Right.
is there's some very common themes in the research that they
Yeah.
have. We
Love it.
also have going into we have not started school yet. Last week was a crazy week for me. I had students drop out of our program. Of course, as director of admissions, that's my job. Then I'm looking to fill those spots. Of course, it's the week before school, so many people have already made arrangements for this coming year. And then But I found, we had 3 students enroll in the last 36 hours of last week. It was
Wow.
just a real, with teachers coming back, it was teacher week. That's always a busy week. And then in addition to giving tours and going through the admissions process and having to assess and wanting to be thoughtful about not rushing into a decision, not making the families rush into a decision, but also knowing that we have kind of a time constraint with school starting this Wednesday,
Yep.
and really wanting some of these younger students in particular to be there for this first 6 weeks of school. We know that's important. But I was also rushing home each day to make sure I could spend time with my oldest son before he left over the weekend. And gosh, it was a week. My husband resigned from his job. He's taking a new job that he starts next week. It
Oh,
was
wow.
a lot. So again, school was really busy. I was coming home. I had a couple of doctor's appointments that I was trying to cram in. I again was trying to have this family time with my son, with my husband, who was having his own experience and emotions of leaving a job with people who we really, really, really enjoyed working with. And then on Friday afternoon, again, I rushed home. I left our faculty happy hour early so that I could see James off to the airport. Jamie and I dropped him off. We came home. We walked over to dinner, and it was just silent.
Hmm.
And that was it. That whole week was over. And the rush and the internal chaos and push and pull I felt of everything just ended. And
Wow.
here we are, back with our empty nest. I had an awesome summer with my boys when they were home and not, but it was a reminder of how quickly things can change. And of course, this is all change for the good. This is all life change, and not
Yeah.
all change
Right.
is positive. But it was a stark contrast from my week to how it ended. So
Wow.
kind of a crazy time in our house, but now slowly moving into what will be our first week of school.
That is so wild. It reminds me that saying, the silence is deafening, right?
Yes.
Like the irony of that statement, like how can silence be deafening? But just the way you described so much movement and change and energy and life, and then all of a sudden there's
Quiet.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that you had a meal
Yes.
and then you cooked it,
Yes, right. And
And yeah,
yes, we came
yeah,
together at the
yeah,
table and
yeah,
connected, just the two of us, which
right,
which
yeah,
we haven't had since May.
yeah,
Here and there
wow,
we have, but
right,
this is our life, is the two of us with our kids coming in and out of our lives, as it happens when you
sure,
have adult children.
right,
But thank you for pointing that out. It was at a meal. It was with a celebratory drink that we were, cheering, or at least recognizing and saying cheers, toasting, I guess is a better word.
yes,
This new stage that we're at.
wow, well, yeah, here. That is quite an image, but also just the awareness around it, I think, is so important. So we'll see how the next few weeks, what does that kind of, it won't be silent, but it'll be a new kind of sound, right?
Yes.
Reverberations. See what that looks like.
Yep. Well, and speaking of sound, we have a new policy at St. Anne's this year that I would be curious to hear what you're doing where you are, but it's a hot topic across the country. It's getting a lot of mainstream publicity. Of course, we are a school that ends in 8th grade, so not as cell phones are not as prevalent in all of our grades. They certainly were in middle school, but we're taking a pretty hard stance on this. Families had to opt in to allow their middle school student to send the phone to school, with the understanding that it will be checked at the front office every day. So we have some bike riders, some walkers, some bus riders. Understandable, a family would want them to have that cell phone on them as they're traveling on their own to and from school, but the phone will not go further than that. And we've also had some hard conversations with our teachers and staff about cell phone aware,
Mhm.
being
Yeah,
aware of cell
yeah,
phone usage during the school
yeah,
day. So of course, we can have the greatest policies in the world, or at least is, the firmest policies. They have to be enacted. And I
yep,
think that will be maybe our bigger challenge than actually setting the policy. But I I couldn't be more excited about this. I'm looking forward to. I think there is no need, no room for cell phones in school. I was surprised our public school here thought they were coming down with a hard cell phone policy. Their policy was for lower and middle school students, their phones had to be on silent or off during the day,
Okay.
but they could
Yeah.
still have them.
Yeah.
I'm not sure
Yeah.
why they think
Hmm.
silent is going to help, but that's okay. That's not it.
Right.
They're maybe taking smaller steps than
Yeah.
in enacting change than we can take, at a smaller school. So I'd be curious. Certainly, you're a high school. What do you have going on?
Yeah. So I'm thrilled you brought it up. I think that's super interesting about at the door, like to the school.
Hmm.
So we do have a policy, and I could not agree more. People are fighting back, and it's, teachers, schools taking a stand. And one of the ideas that intrigues me about that, Haley, is many times it's actually not even the student, it's the parent at home that
Yes.
is reaching out to their children. Like, as an example, I subbed a class. My friends like texted me and they said, our child is in we hear you are subbing for our child. Yay. Like, so there is a whole milieu. So the comprehensive, just look at even how teachers are using the phone. I think it's so valuable. I love the way that was just, I don't know, practiced or carried out for your community. Yes, we have definitely taken a stand. So one thing would be the caddy. You leave, once you walk in the classroom, you leave your phone in the caddy. Uh, Students are doing that. And there was some skepticism. Some people would say, oh, it's just a burner phone. But students are they're doing it. They're
Great.
putting it in there. So we have that. I just had the policy that I had last year. I'm not having them put in the caddy, but I might change. I don't know. I could do it at the semester. When they walk through my room, there is no cell phone. It is out of sight. And if you want to text, you go in the hallway, but they still have cell phone usage in free, open spaces. But one thing that I thought was super interesting is I read in Sally Jenkins' book, that I've been reading, The Right Call. In the NBA, it's a major problem. So at halftime, a number of players look at their phone. So the story was through the example of Doc Rivers when he was with the Sixers, and all these players look at their phone, and what happens is they look at their stats, and they were seeing how well they were playing or if they were under. So again, like, field goal percentage, whatever it may be, free throw, and it was getting in their head. And even their agents sometimes would like give them advice unsolicited. And so it was really detracting from the culture of the locker room.
Wow.
So Doc Rivers and Steve Kerr had to talk about this. Like, these are grown men and they didn't want to put rules and say you can't have your cell phone. So then one of Rivers' like methods was like, when one of his guys was on the phone, he said, well, tell her I said, I'll call you later too. Like, he kind of made a joke, like he was maybe texting his girlfriend or wife or something. And so he was going to use sort of like backhanded humor to get him off. And that seemed to be what worked, as opposed to like the no cell phone rule. So it's just interesting. It was interesting to go outside of the classroom environment and to see on the professional level, like, this is something a lot of people are thinking about, but also struggling with. They're not perfect. We don't have a method, but we know we want something to change.
Right. Right. And especially with our younger kids, there's no need for it. And I will say, so far, most of our parents, again, we haven't started school yet, so we'll see how it works out in practice. But most of, maybe, we'll see. Our parents have been very supportive, have thanked us as a school, because now they almost don't have to be the bad guy. We know parents don't like to do that these days. So they can blame it on the school. This is the school policy, as opposed to the parents having to take the hard stance. I give a shout out to, fortunately, my cell phones were not really prevalent when my kids were in middle school, so I never had to fight that. A lot of our parents these days have to fight cell phones as early as, second, third grade. Everybody has one, I don't. And that's probably not true, but that's what they're hearing. Shout out to Mount St. Joseph High School in Baltimore, where my boys went. They had a no cell phone policy the entire 4 years each of my boys were there. And they were not allowed to have their cell phone anywhere in sight from 8 a.m. till 2:30, the school day. Not even lunch, not break, not lunch. They had again, going back to the table, sit at the lunch table and talk to one another. And I I see that now in both of my boys being able to have a conversation and converse.
Sure.
And I love that. That, certainly that was over, that was 4, 5, 6 years ago. So it's been a while. But in some ways they were ahead of the curve there, and maybe they were
Yeah.
just really, really old school, and now everything has sort of changed. But a shout
That's
out to
cool.
that. So
I applaud that. So,
speaking of things that have changed, in our
ah,
spiritual stew and the gospel this week for those of us and our listeners who went to mass today, it's an interesting reading, and it seems like I'd be curious to know if your mass used the alternate version. Mine did, but I noticed when I received the gospel this morning in my inbox, Faith ND, that I know a lot of us subscribe to, it had both of them listed. Or I read somewhere online it had both of them listed. But it's actually the second reading from
correct.
Ephesians, where
Yeah.
it's talking about wives should be subordinate to their husbands, for the husband is the head of the wife. That is just as Christ is the head of the church. That's some tricky language. The subordinate is tricky. The husband is the head of his wife is tricky language. That, I think, for many centuries was the way it was. It's interesting that the second version of this reading, again, which is what I heard, it has the same tone, but it takes off that top part. And I think
Yep.
that is where I think the Catholic Church tried to defend this reading for many years, because when you do scroll further down or listen further down, I'm looking at it right now, it does talk about, the husband loving his wife as he loves himself, and revering her and cherishing her, and all of the things that, of course, we would hope for a couple and a spouse.
Mhm.
But many people couldn't get past that first part.
Yeah.
So they have this second version that skips that first part and goes right to husbands loving their wives as Christ loved the church. So just kind of an interesting reading. In many ways, it shows how the church has evolved. They have not sort of stuck their foot in the ground and said, this is the way it is, and this is what the Bible says, and we're going to stick with it. I think they've come to recognize that words were relevant at one time, and now there are words that they can change
Yeah.
the meaning, or at least I
Right.
don't. I would love to hear what I would love to hear what you think, Anne.
No, I thank you for bringing up. I loved in our notes. So for our listeners, we have notes, and it was amazing. Like, I wanted to speak to it, and I went to your notes, and I thought, oh, we're on literally the same page here. So my 8 a.m. mass is usually said by the same priest. He's an elder priest, retired, but still he lives in the parish. He's not a diocesan priest. He's from a religious community, but this is his life, and he's a wonderful priest. Most of his homilies are scripted. I don't know if something he's written in the past, or somebody else. And I mean, he's got to be mid 80s. So he gave his typical homily, which are good. He has great delivery. The message is always good. And he paused, and then he kind of, sorry, let me backtrack. Before the second reading began, he stood up and he said, we will be reading the alternate version. So he made note of it. So then he gives his homily, and then he pauses. And I thought, I don't, I'm like, is he okay? Like, health wise, is he forgetting something? And he said, I want to speak to the alternate version. And he was truly preaching. He was off script. He said, look, whenever we read scripture, we always put it in context, right, of a place and a time. We pay attention to the culture. So yes, at that time, we know this, women were quite almost like literally the property of right? Their husbands. That's why women are considered the Anawim, because like a widow is somebody who's lost her husband. She has literally no power. Women had power because they could have children, right? And take care of a home. So when you are a widow, what is your power? There's nothing. So yes, like it was trying to give a message of like you are subordinate and you should be respected, you are to be loved, you are to be, and he gave a couple of other examples of where context is necessary, like slaves should love their masters,
Mm-hmm.
masters love your slaves, how we do not at all, condone. I always mess up the word condone, Haley. We do not. What does condone? To promote? We do not condone
Right,
slavery.
correct.
And he said, even the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. He's like, is that correct? He's like, we say that, we see that, but the reality is we're always going
Spinning.
around the sun, which I
Mhm.
thought was such a great example. So it's
Right.
like our experience is we see that, but the reality is something different. So he said, I just appreciated how he kind of taught to that message
Hmm.
and said, but yeah, to your point, like what do we need to consider? And then one of the intentions, Prayers of the Faithful, was for married couples,
Hmm.
right? For widows and widowers. He actually even prayed for people living together, which I thought was really interesting because so many young people do live together now.
Right.
And a lot of people, I know like my parents have a very hard time with that. They think that this is a strong word, but sinful.
Right.
But we know, that's a reality among many people. So just even pray for them, I thought was, wow, this is really interesting. And then he did add Vatican II taught us to look for the signs of the times. So we always apply the message of the day to the era in which we live.
And again, that is the church. And I know many people think the church is evolving too slowly, but there are signs of that. And even what you're pre-shared, praying for those who are living together, that is a sign of change. That is a sign of the church progressing, or at least looking to the signs of the times. But a couple of things you said that I just want to comment on. One, I love the idea that we are just talking about a reading. So any reading that people are still talking about after mass, I think is a good one because it is powerful. I also love the idea that you shared, and you are a speaker, you speak, I speak, of being able to recognize when someone goes off script, because
Mm-hmm.
I do see it often during homilies in particular, but it's also, you can also see it during commencement addresses, really during any presentation where there is a scripted speech, where they are presenting and they can be dynamic, and it's not that they're reading, but then there is this almost shift in tone, shift
Yep.
in tenor, shift in something, and maybe only you or I and those who speak can see that, but it is certainly something that one recognizes, as when you're sitting listening to someone else speak. I try not to be critical of those who are speaking, but there is an awareness there that I think when you're on the other side, you do recognize. So those things stuck out to me when you were talking.
Yeah, it was. It's interesting, Haley, because he said this is the first time I've done this, and I do wonder, like, what prompted him today to do that. Is this something that's been shared by the larger church? Like, hey, let's collectively take a time out and look at this alternate version. So, something to figure out for maybe our next episode follow up on. So, what do you got? What are your takeaways for this week?
So I just want to follow up with my last episode takeaway, which was to not gossip as much. And again, that's such a negative, hard, strong word, but I am going to use it as it relates to myself. I don't want to say I did a good job, because self praise is not necessarily how I want to act either. But I will say there were a number of times where something happened, somebody said something, something popped into my head, and I thought, oh, I should go tell so and so that. And then I paused and I said, no, that is not productive. I don't need to do that, especially with this crazy week. I don't have time for that. So I was able to at least recognize, stop, and pause. Did I share some of those tidbits? Yes. Was I
Mm-hmm.
aware of it? Yes. Did I stop from some? Yes. So I am going to, again, week by week, try to keep that up. This is also, again, our first week of school. I felt like this summer has been very healthy for me in many ways, socially, emotionally, health-wise, physically, spiritually. There was a lot of self-care that took place, and I would like to keep up with that, which includes what I tried to do last year, which is not having college football physically make me nauseous. I have failed at that. I looked at our family calendar for the week and I saw Notre Dame A&M next Saturday, and I had this physical response, but it's okay. I'm going to take it week by week. It's an exciting time, certainly, but really the self-care and slowing down to make sure that I'm making the best use of my time as life gets busier this fall.
That's great. And then you'll be able to be aware of those moments where I think maybe you do choose not to gossip or whatnot. It's just part of me wonders, and I think I know the answer to this. This is another topic for another time. Gossip can be fun, right? Because it's like, ooh, it's juicy. But then we talk about it's hollow. It's like sugar, I guess. Right?
And we know how much I love sugar.
And yes. Yeah. Oh my gosh, candy corn, it's already out. Okay, so I'm going to stay with that. I'm going to stay with the sugar image. So we all have a little bit of sugar. We're not Tom Brady, who eliminated refined sugar and processed foods from his diet. Maybe there's a little bit of sugar, but we can always do better. And one of the images that I thought of when you were talking, so part of any sort of self-knowledge is knowing what works for you, right? So for me, in my golf game, with 50 yards in, I have to go 9-3 with this pitching wedge. It's not everybody's approach, but it works for me. And I was thinking about literally how I watch myself. Okay, 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And as you were talking about, you had an awareness of this is something I could share. And I could go and talk to them, and that's 9-3. If I go more than 9, if I go less than 3, the shot doesn't work out. So for our sports and analogs, that one is a good one to help me kind of think about if there's some sort of temptation that I face, right? Keeping it balanced, 9-3, I have to put it in that framework. So, okay, all right.
Great takeaways. Well, I look forward to connecting again in a few more weeks. I hope your first 3 weeks, you're probably getting ready to wrap up your first 3 weeks of school-ish.
We are, yes, and looking forward to Labor Day. I think an A- this holiday, maybe, Hannah?
Yes, I would agree. There's a number. Well, certainly have to talk about that. It's the end of summer. It takes on a lot of different meaning, but yeah, A- sounds good. But good luck with the end of your 3 weeks of school as you establish those norms and find that lunch table. And I will look forward to connecting with you and our listeners in the next couple weeks.
We'll gather around that table. Okay, sounds good.